Lorraine Beckett heard them before she saw them. A low rumble rolling down the hills east of Crestwood, Pennsylvania. Not thunder. Not construction. Something alive, something mechanical. Something that made the windows of her bakery vibrate in their old wooden frames. She was arranging cinnamon rolls in the display case, the same display case her husband Warren had built with his own hands 26 years ago, when the sound grew louder. Closer. The kind of sound that didn't belong in a town like Crestwood on a quiet Tuesday morning in October. Mrs. Pemberton burst through the front door first, eyes wide, face drained of color, clutching her handbag against her chest like a shield. "Lorraine, you need to come to the window right now." The 64-year-old baker wiped her hands on her apron. Flour dust drifted from her fingers like snow. She followed her oldest customer to the front of the shop and looked through the glass. What she saw turned her blood to ice. Motorcycles. Not a handful. Not a dozen. Rows of them stretching the full length of Main Street, 3 columns deep chrome, catching the pale morning sun, exhaust pipes breathing white vapor into the cold air. She counted without thinking. Stopped at 30. Started again. Lost count. Later she would learn the exact number, 97. 97 Harley-Davidsons rolling toward her bakery in perfect formation. Every rider sat tall in the saddle. Black leather, heavy boots, and on every back the same patch. The Hells Angels' death's head, skull grinning, wings spread wide. This did not happen in Crestwood. Population 2,400, 1 traffic light, 3 churches, a town where the biggest headline was usually the winner of the apple butter contest at the Allegheny County Fair. A town where everyone knew everyone, where doors stayed unlocked and children rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. The motorcycles pulled to a stop outside Lorraine's bakery. One by one, the engines cut off. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Heavier, fuller, the kind of silence that happens before something changes forever. Lorraine's hands found the edge of the counter. She gripped it until her knuckles went white. Behind her, the register was open. She'd been counting yesterday's receipts. $43 in small bills. A Tuesday's worth of bread and coffee in a dying town. Through the window, she watched the lead rider dismount. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested years of physical labor, not a gym membership. His face was weathered tan, lined by sun and wind and hard years. A scar ran from his left temple down to the edge of his jawline, a thin white line against dark skin. He wore black leather from head to toe, his vest heavy with patches she didn't understand. Symbols, words, city names. When he removed his helmet, dark hair fell past his shoulders. He was maybe 40, maybe a year or two younger. Hard to tell with men who lived like this. He looked directly at the bakery, directly at her, and started walking toward the door. Behind him, 96 other men swung off their bikes and followed. Lorraine's mind raced. What had she done? Who had she offended? She'd lived in this town for 43 years, ran this bakery for 25, paid her taxes, went to First Presbyterian on Sundays when her back wasn't acting up, helped organize the church rummage sale every spring, brought casseroles to sick neighbors. She was not the kind of woman who attracted this kind of attention. But then something flickered in the back of her mind, a memory she'd carried for 21 years. Kept it folded up and tucked away like an old letter in a drawer, which is exactly where it was. A different season, a different morning. January cold that cut through everything. A boy with a black eye and an empty stomach standing outside this very door at 5:30 in the morning, shaking so hard she could hear his teeth rattle through the glass. A stolen jacket that looked exactly like the ones these men wore. She'd fed him. She'd sheltered him. She'd told him something that made him cry. Something she couldn't quite remember now, though. The shape of it remained, the weight of it, the way his face had changed when she said it. Then he'd vanished. Left a note and disappeared into the cold Pennsylvania morning, and she'd spent 2 decades wondering if he was alive or dead. The lead rider reached for the door handle. Every customer in the bakery had gone silent. Mrs. Pemberton gripped her purse with both hands. Old Mr. Hargrove, who'd been reading the Crestwood Courier in the corner booth every Tuesday morning for 30 years, folded his newspaper slowly and set it down. A young mother near the window pulled her 2 children close against her body. The door opened. The bell above it rang once, a small, cheerful sound completely at odds with the moment. The man stepped inside. He was bigger up close, broader. His arms were roped with muscle and covered in tattoos that disappeared under his sleeves and reappeared at his wrists and knuckles. His hands were enormous, working hands, scarred across the backs. But his eyes were not hard. They were searching, moving across the bakery, taking in every detail. The cinnamon rolls cooling on wire racks, the chalkboard menu in Lorraine's careful handwriting, the red and white checkered curtains she'd sewn herself the year the bakery opened. The photographs on the wall, faded now. Warren at the grand opening, standing proud in front of the storefront, tool belt still around his waist because he'd been hanging the sign that morning. The man's gaze stopped on that photograph for a long moment. Then his eyes came to Lorraine's face. Lorraine Beckett, she nodded. Her throat had sealed shut. No words would come. He looked around the small space one more time, slowly, deliberately, like a man returning to a place he'd only seen in dreams, like he was making sure it was real. You remember feeding a kid back in 2003? His voice was deep, rough at the edge and like gravel under tires, but not unkind. 19 years old, beat to hell, showed up at your door before dawn in the middle of January. Lorraine's hand flew to her chest. The memory that had been flickering sharpened, focused, became clear as glass. The boy, the frozen morning, the knock before sunrise. You gave him bread, the man continued. His voice had softened now, the gravel smoothing out. You gave him a place to sleep in the back. You paid him for work he barely did. You talked to him like he was human. He paused. You told him something he never forgot. Behind him, more men filed through the door. They moved quietly, respectfully, removing their sunglasses, keeping their voices low. But they filled the small bakery until there was barely room to breathe. Leather and denim and road dust and engine oil, tattoos on arms and necks and hands. Faces that had seen hard living, hard choices, hard years. But not one of them looked threatening. They looked like men waiting for something sacred. Lorraine pressed her trembling hands flat against the counter to stop the shaking. I remember, she whispered. The man's face changed. Something behind his expression cracked open. A door he had been holding, shut for 21 years. Good, he said, because that kid never forgot you either. He took a half step closer. What you told that boy became the foundation of everything he built after. He glanced at the men filling the bakery behind him, then back to her. But before I explain why we're here, I need to take you back to that winter, because you need to understand what you did and why it changed everything. If you've ever wondered whether one small act of kindness can really change the world, stay with me, because what Lorraine Beckett did in January of 2003 about to come full circle in a way she never imagined. And it starts with the worst year of her life. 21 years earlier, Lorraine Beckett had been a different woman, not just younger, 43 instead of 64, not just stronger though she was, that too still able to lift 50-pound bags of flour without her shoulders screaming. She had been hollowed out, scraped raw by grief, held together by nothing more than routine and responsibility and the stubborn refusal to let her dead husband's dream die with him. Warren Beckett was killed on November 14, 2002. Construction accident, a scaffolding collapse on a commercial project in Harrisburg, 45 minutes from home. He was 47 years old. They'd been married 23 years. High school sweethearts from Crestwood, who'd never wanted to be anywhere else, never wanted to be anyone else, just wanted to build something together in the town where they'd grown up. He died instantly, the foreman told her on the phone. Didn't suffer, like that was supposed to help. Like knowing the scaffolding came down so fast he never felt it was supposed to make the funeral easier. The empty bed warmer, the silence in the house less suffocating. The investigation later found a faulty bolt, a safety inspector who'd signed off on the rig without checking, a corner cut to save time. Warren Beckett's life traded for someone's schedule. The settlement from the construction company covered the medical bills and most of the funeral. It did not cover the hole in Lorraine's chest where her heart used to be. The bakery had been Warren's idea. He'd worked construction his entire adult life, framing houses, pouring foundations, hanging drywall. Good with his hands in a way that went beyond skill into something closer to instinct. He could look at a broken thing and see how to fix it, could look at an empty space and see what it could become. But he'd always talked about something else, a business of their own, something they'd build together, run together, leave to Colleen someday. Colleen was their daughter, their only child, the center of everything they did. In 1998, when Colleen was 17 and finishing her junior year at Crestwood High Warren, and Lorraine bought the failing sandwich shop on Main Street, poured their savings into renovations. Warren did all the carpentry himself, nights and weekends after his construction shifts, built the display cases from reclaimed oak, installed the industrial oven, laid the tile floor, painted the walls a warm cream that made the whole space feel like a kitchen you'd want to sit in forever. Lorraine's Bakery opened in the spring of 1999. Warren stood out front for the photograph that still hung on the wall, grinning so wide his eyes nearly disappeared. Tool belt still on, sawdust in his hair. 4 years later, he was gone. After Warren died, Lorraine thought about selling the bakery every single day for a month. What was the point? Running a bakery had been their dream. Theirs, together. The word alone hadn't been part of the plan. Alone was a punishment. Alone was waking up at 4 in the morning and reaching for the other side of the bed and finding nothing but cold sheets. But Colleen was at Penn State, sophomore year now, studying education. Tuition wasn't going to pay itself. The mortgage on the bakery building wasn't going to pay itself. The medical bills, even with the settlement, weren't going to pay themselves. And the bakery was the only income Lorraine had. So she got up every morning. 4 a.m., alarm clock on the nightstand. Warren had built from scraps of walnut left over from a job. She got up and she showered and she drove to the bakery in the dark, unlocked the door, turned on the ovens, started the first batch of bread, then the cinnamon rolls. Warren's mother's recipe. Mildred Beckett's cinnamon rolls had been famous in Crestwood since the 1960s. Lorraine had learned to make them the week after the wedding, standing in Mildred's kitchen with flour on her nose and a notebook full of measurements she'd never need to look at again because she'd memorized them by the third batch. Cinnamon, brown sugar, butter, yeast dough risen twice, rolled thin, spread thick, coiled tight, baked until golden, cream cheese glaze drizzled on top while still warm enough to melt. Those cinnamon rolls were the reason half of Crestwood came through her door. She made them every morning. Opened at 6, closed at 6, pretended she was fine. The town knew better. Small towns always know. They saw the dark circles carved under her eyes like bruises that wouldn't heal. They saw how thin she'd gotten, saw her clothes getting looser, her shoulders narrowing, her cheekbones sharpening. They saw her sitting alone in the empty bakery after closing time lights on, staring at nothing, talking to the photograph of Warren behind the register. They bought their bread. They offered their condolences. They told her if she needed anything at all, to just ask. And then they went home to their living husbands and their intact families and their grief-free evenings. Lorraine went home to a house that smelled less like Warren every day. By January 2003, she had been running the bakery alone for 14 months. She had developed a rhythm that was less a routine than a survival mechanism. 4 a.m. wake, shower, drive, unlock, ovens on, first batch of bread, cinnamon rolls next, pastries, coffee brewing by 5:30, lights on, door open at 6 sharp. She could do it in her sleep now. Some mornings she wondered if she was sleeping. If this entire life since November 14th was a dream she'd eventually wake from, and Warren would be there alive, snoring softly, one arm thrown over her waist the way he'd slept every night of their marriage. The winter of 2003 was brutal. Pennsylvania cold, the kind that settled into your bones and set up camp and refused to leave. Temperatures dropped below 10 degrees for 2 straight weeks. The bakery's ancient heating system coughed and sputtered and barely kept the front room above 55. Lorraine wore layers, thermal underwear, 2 sweaters under her apron. She ran the ovens constantly just to stay warm. Behind the register, she'd taped a photograph of Warren. Young Warren, 23-year-old Warren from before the gray hair and the bad knee and the reading glasses he refused to wear in public. He was smiling in that picture, the kind of smile that made you want to smile back even though he couldn't see you. She talked to that photograph. Late at night after closing, while she counted receipts and swept floors and wiped down tables, she told him about the customers, about Mrs. Pemberton's hip replacement, about Mr. Hargrove's latest letter to the editor, about the way the north wall was starting to show a crack she couldn't afford to fix. She told him about Colleen's phone calls from college, how their daughter was doing well, student teaching now, would graduate in May, would make a wonderful teacher because she had Warren's patience and Lorraine's stubbornness, which was everything a teacher needed. She told him how tired she was, how lonely, how some nights she closed the register and couldn't remember a single reason to open it again in the morning. The photograph never answered. Warren never answered, but it helped somehow, saying the words out loud, giving the grief a shape, a voice, a direction, even if no one was listening. She'd lost everything that mattered: her husband, her partner, her best friend. The man who made her laugh when nothing was funny. The man who could fix anything with his hands and heal anything with his patience. The retirement they'd been saving for. The grandchildren they'd talked about. The growing old together that was supposed to be the reward for all those years of hard work and early mornings and choosing each other every single day. Gone. All of it, one November afternoon, one faulty bolt, one inspector's signature on a form he never should have signed. So when the boy appeared on that frozen January morning, when she saw something in his eyes, she recognized in her own reflection every morning in the bathroom mirror, the look of someone who had been knocked down and was no longer sure how to stand back up. She made a choice. Maybe it was because she couldn't save Warren. Maybe it was because she needed to save someone, anyone, to prove that saving was still possible in a world that had taken everything from her. Maybe it was just because of Warren's voice in her head, the voice she heard every time someone in need crossed her path. Feed first, ask questions later. You never know whose life you're saving. Warren Beckett had grown up rough. His mother Mildred raised him alone after his father left when Warren was 3. They moved through the foster system for 2 years when Mildred lost her job and couldn't keep the apartment. Warren never talked about those years. Not in detail, just fragments that surfaced sometimes late at night. He'd been in a group home for 11 months. He'd seen things an 8-year-old should never see. When Mildred got back on her feet and reclaimed him, he was a different boy. Harder, quieter. Grateful in a way that broke your heart because no child should have to be that grateful just for being wanted. At 16, he stole a car. Joyride. Stupid teenage impulse. Got caught, spent 4 months in a juvenile facility. It scared him straight. He came out, finished high school, started working construction the day after graduation. Never looked back. Built a life, a reputation, a family. But he never forgot where he came from. Never forgot what it felt like to be young and scared and invisible. Never forgot the cold of a group home in January, the sound of other boys crying in the dark, the feeling that the whole world had decided you weren't worth the trouble. Feed first, ask questions later. That was Warren's philosophy. And 21 years ago, on a January morning, so cold the air itself seemed to crack, Lorraine Beckett lived it. The knocking started at 5:30. She was elbow deep in dough, kneading the second batch of sourdough bread when she heard it. Sharp, insistent, not a polite knock, a desperate one. The kind made by hands that were freezing. The bakery didn't open for another 30 minutes. Nobody came by this early, not even Mr. Hargrove, who usually appeared at 6:05 with the precision of a railroad watch. Lorraine wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and walked to the front, peered through the glass door. A boy stood outside. Teenager, maybe 19, maybe younger. Hard to tell with the damage to his face. His left eye was swollen nearly shut, a deep purple-black bruise spreading across his cheekbone and down toward his jaw. His lip was split, dried blood crusted at the corner of his mouth. His nose looked like it might be broken, swollen, and shifted slightly to one side. He wore a jacket 2 sizes too big. Black leather, heavy, the kind that cost more than Lorraine's monthly mortgage payment. On the back patches she recognized from television, from news reports, from the vague cultural awareness that comes from living in America. Hell's Angels, Prospect Rocker across the top, Pennsylvania Bottom Rocker, the death's head in the center skull and wings stitched in white and red. But it was his eyes that stopped her. The right one, the one that wasn't swollen shut, was dark brown, almost black, and it held nothing. No anger, no defiance, no threat, just exhaustion. The kind of tired that goes past physical, past emotional, into something structural. The tired of a person whose foundation has crumbled. He wasn't wearing gloves. His hands pressed against the glass were red and raw from cold, knuckles bruised and scabbed. No hat, his hair dark and too long was dusted with frost. He wore jeans torn at both knees, sneakers with holes in them, no socks visible. The temperature outside was 11 degrees. 11 degrees. And this child was standing at her door before dawn, looking like someone had used his face for practice. Lorraine's first instinct was to call the police. Her second was Warren. Warren at 8 years old, cold and scared in a group home. Warren at 16, sitting in a juvenile cell, wondering if anyone was coming for him. Warren at 20, telling Lorraine on their first date about the foster system, about the years he'd lost, about the moment he decided he would never let another person feel as worthless as he'd felt. Feed first, ask questions later. She unlocked the door. The boy flinched. Actually flinched, like he was bracing for a shout, a threat, a slammed door. Like every door he'd ever knocked on had been slammed in his face. Instead, Lorraine said 5 words that would eventually save more lives than she would ever know. Get inside before you freeze. He hesitated, looked behind him into the dark street, checked both directions like a hunted animal scanning for predators. Then he stepped into the warmth of the bakery and the heat hit him so hard his knees buckled. Up close, he was worse than she'd thought. The jacket was definitely not his. It hung off his thin frame like a tent's sleeves past his fingertips, shoulders sagging. Underneath a gray t-shirt that might have been white once, his collarbone jutted out above the neckline. He was underweight, significantly underweight. The kind of thin that comes from weeks without proper food, not days. He was shaking, full-body tremors that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with the 11-degree morning he'd been standing in. His lips were bluish. His fingers, now that she could see them in the light, were waxy-looking. Early frostbite. "I'm not here to rob you," he said. His voice was hoarse, cracked, like he hadn't spoken in days. I'm hungry. I can work. I'll wash dishes, mop floors, whatever you need. I'm good with my hands. I can fix things." Lorraine looked at those hands, the bruised knuckles, the split skin, the way they trembled even now inside in the warmth. "Sit down," she said, pointed to the corner booth. "Sit down before you fall down." He obeyed, moved like every muscle and every joint hurt, slid into the booth and wrapped his arms around himself, still shaking. His good eye tracked her as she walked behind the counter, watching, waiting, not trusting. Lorraine went to the kitchen. She did not think, did not weigh options, did not calculate risk, did not consider that she was a 63-year-old woman alone in a bakery at 5:30 in the morning with a stranger in a Hell's Angels jacket who could be anyone, could have done anything, could be dangerous in ways she couldn't imagine. She just cooked scrambled eggs, 4 eggs, butter, salt, pepper, cooked slow the way Warren liked them, soft and creamy, not rubbery. Bacon, 6 strips, crispy, the way Colleen liked it, the way Lorraine had made it every Saturday morning of Colleen's childhood. Toast, wheat bread fresh from yesterday's last batch, still good, just firm enough to hold butter. A mug of hot chocolate, real chocolate, not powder. Milk heated on the stovetop. 3 spoonfuls of cocoa, sugar, extra marshmallows, and a cinnamon roll, still warm from the morning's first batch. Glaze dripping down the sides in slow white rivers. She brought it all to the booth on Warren's favorite serving tray, the blue one with the white rim, the one she hadn't been able to use since he died because it hurt too much. She used it now, set it in front of the boy. "Eat." He stared at the food. His good eye moved across the plate. The eggs, the bacon, the toast, the cinnamon roll, the hot chocolate with marshmallows melting into small white islands. He stared at it like a man seeing water after crossing a desert, like he didn't believe it was real, like he was waiting for someone to take it away. Then he picked up the fork and he ate, fast, desperate, the way a person eats when they haven't seen food in days and aren't sure they'll see it again. He shoveled the eggs in without tasting them, bit the bacon strips in half, tore the toast and pushed it into his mouth, picked up the cinnamon roll and took a bite so large his cheeks bulged. Lorraine turned away, gave him the dignity of not being watched. She went back to her bread dough and kneaded it with hands that knew the work so well they didn't need her brain's permission. But she watched him in the reflection of the display case glass. The way Warren used to watch Colleen eat when she was little, with that expression of quiet satisfaction that comes from feeding someone who needs it. The boy ate everything, every bite, licked the glaze off his fingers, drained the hot chocolate. When he finished, he sat staring at the empty plate for a long moment. Then his shoulders started shaking. Not from cold this time. He was crying, silently, tears running down his damaged face, dripping off his jaw onto the table. His body curled forward over the empty plate like he was trying to fold himself small enough to disappear. "Thank you." Barely a whisper. "Thank you." Lorraine brought him a glass of water and sat across from him in the booth. She didn't rush him, didn't push, just sat, the way Warren used to sit with Colleen after a bad day at school. Present, patient, available. "What's your name?" He wiped his face with the back of his hand, smeared tears and dried blood across his cheek. "Caleb." She didn't believe him. Something about the way his eyes shifted when he said it, but she didn't push. "Where are you from, Caleb?" He shrugged. "Around." The jacket caught her eye again. The Hells Angels prospect patch. Either he'd stolen it, which was dangerous in its own way, because you didn't steal from the Angels, or he'd been trying to join, and something had gone very, very wrong. Either way, someone had beaten him badly. Recently, within the last day or two. "You have family." He shook his head. The motion was small, tired. "Aged out of foster care 5 months ago. Been on my own since." Lorraine's heart clenched. She knew that story. Warren had lived it. The system took you in when you were too young to save yourself and spit you out at 18 with nothing. No support, no safety net, no plan, just a garbage bag of clothes and a bus ticket and a handshake that said, "Good luck, kid, the world is yours now," even though the world had never been yours. Not once, not for a single day. Some kids survived it, made it through, found footing, found people, found themselves. Most didn't. "How long since you ate?" Lorraine asked. The boy looked at his bruised hands, turned them over, studied the scabs on his knuckles like they were someone else's hands attached to someone else's body telling someone else's story. 3 days, maybe 4. 3 days. This child had been starving for 3 days in January in Pennsylvania, and no one had noticed. No one had stopped. No one had asked. Lorraine made a decision. Maybe it was stupid. Probably it was dangerous. The kind of choice that could go wrong in 100 different ways. A stranger in a stolen jacket with a beaten face and a name that wasn't his real name. Every sensible bone in her body told her to call the police, let the system handle it, protect herself. But Warren's voice was louder than common sense. "Feed first, ask questions later. You never know whose life you're saving." "I've got a storage room in back," she said. "There's a space heater, some boxes, not much, but I can clear a space. It's dry and it's warm. You can stay there if you work. Wash dishes, mop floors, prep ingredients. I'll pay you minimum wage and feed you 3 meals a day." The boy's head came up, his good eye locked on her face, searching for the lie, the catch, the angle, because in his world, nobody offered something for nothing. In his world, kindness was always currency, always came with a price. Why would you do that? Lorraine looked at Warren's photograph behind the register. Young Warren, smiling Warren, the man who taught her that people were not disposable. "Because it's cold," she said. "Because you're somebody's son. Because I can." The boy's eye filled. He blinked hard, tried to stop it, couldn't. "I'll work hard," he said. "I promise. I won't steal. I won't cause trouble. I'll do whatever you need." "I know," Lorraine said, though she didn't. Not really. She was just choosing to believe. The first few days, the boy barely spoke. He worked like someone terrified of being thrown back into the cold. Up before Lorraine arrived at 4:30, already sweeping the storage room floor by flashlight. He washed every dish twice, mopped until the tile gleamed, organized the supply shelves with a precision that surprised her, labeled everything, straightened everything. Like order was the only thing he could control. He ate what she gave him, always said thank you, then disappeared into the back room. She'd hear him through the wall late at night, restless, pacing. The creak of the old floorboards under his weight as he walked back and forth, unable to settle. On the third day, he fixed the oven. Lorraine had been meaning to call the repair company for weeks. The temperature gauge was off, running 20 degrees too hot, burning the bottoms of her bread if she wasn't careful. She'd learned to compensate, set it lower, check more often, Rotate the pans. The boy noticed, didn't ask permission, just knelt down one morning, pulled the lower panel off, and started examining the wiring. 2 hours later, the oven was running perfectly. Temperature dead accurate for the first time in months. "How'd you learn to do that?" Lorraine asked. He shrugged. The same shrug from the first morning. Small, defensive. "Foster homes. You fix things yourself or they stay broken. Learn plumbing, electrical, carpentry. Whatever kept me useful." The word hit Lorraine like a fist. Useful. Like his value as a human being was determined by what he could provide. Like he'd learned early that the only way to survive was to make himself necessary, and the moment he stopped being necessary, he'd be discarded. Warren had been the same way. Fix everything. Help everyone. Be indispensable. Because if you're not useful, you're not wanted. And if you're not wanted, you're alone. Week 1 turned into week 2. The bruises on the boy's face faded from purple-black to yellow-green. He started eating more. 3 full meals a day. The shaking stopped. The hollows under his cheekbones began to fill. His shoulders straightened. He slept through the night instead of pacing until dawn. Lorraine found herself looking forward to the quiet companionship, having someone else in the bakery, hearing footsteps that weren't her own, the sound of dishes being washed in the back, the occasional clank of a wrench as he fixed something else she hadn't asked him to fix, the dripping faucet, the loose cabinet hinge, the flickering light above the storage room door. He gave her something she hadn't had in 14 months, purpose beyond routine, a reason to get up that went deeper than obligation. She told him about Warren. Late one evening after the last customer had left and the closed sign was hung. She was wiping down the counter for the 3rd time, a habit that had become more ritual than hygiene, something to do with her hands while her mind wandered. "My husband built this place," she said. Not to the boy specifically, just out loud, the way she talked to Warren's photograph. Every shelf, every display case, that counter you're leaning on, he framed it, sanded it, sealed it. His fingerprints are in the grain. The boy was drying dishes. He didn't stop, but he was listening. Construction accident, November 2002. Scaffolding collapsed on a job in Harrisburg. They said he didn't suffer, like that's supposed to help. She wrung the rag between her hands. He was a good man, grew up rough, foster system for a while when he was a boy. His mother got him out, but those years marked him. He never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. Always said people weren't disposable. Said everybody deserved a shot. She looked at the photograph. Young Warren, smiling Warren. He had this saying, feed first, ask questions later. You never know whose life you're saving. The boy was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the clink of dishes and the hum of the refrigerator. Then, softly, "My mom died when I was 9. Lorraine stopped wiping. Overdose. Found her in the bathroom. Called 911. Stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until the ambulance came. But she was already gone. They told me she'd been gone before I even picked up the phone. 9 years old. Found his mother dead in the bathroom. Called for help that couldn't help. I'm sorry," Lorraine said, and meant it with everything she had. "That's too young, too much to carry." He nodded. Kept drying dishes. Methodical. Controlled. Foster care after that. 11 different homes in 8 years. Some were okay, most weren't. Aged out at 18. They give you a trash bag of your clothes and a bus ticket and say good luck. That's it. No family, no support, no plan, no money, nothing. He set down a plate, picked up another. "What about the jacket?" Lorraine asked. "The Hell's Angels patch." His jaw tightened. She saw the muscle work beneath the fading bruises. "Met some guys outside Pittsburgh after I aged out. They said they were Hell's Angels. Said they'd give me family, belonging, brotherhood, everything I'd never had." He paused. Turned out they were wannabes, small-time dealers using the name, recruiting kids out of foster care because we had nobody to report to, nobody to miss us. They wanted drug runners. I said no. He touched the healing split in his lip. They beat me, told me next time they'd kill me. So I ran. Stole the jacket off the clothesline because winter was coming and I didn't have a coat. He set the last dish on the rack. They caught up with me in Harrisburg. Did this. He gestured to his face. Told me if I talked to anyone they'd find me, so I kept running. Lorraine stood on the other side of the counter, holding her rag and feeling a grief so wide it didn't fit inside her body. This boy, this child, motherless at 9, homeless at 18, beaten by men who promised him family and gave him violence instead. And here he was, drying her dishes, fixing her oven, saying thank you for a cinnamon roll. The conversation that changed everything happened on day 13. It was late, past 10. Lorraine was finishing the prep for tomorrow's cinnamon rolls, portioning butter, measuring cinnamon, when a crash came from the front. She rushed out to find the boy standing over a dropped tray. 6 loaves of cooling bread scattered on the floor. Ruined. It was an accident. The tray was heavy. His hands were wet. These things happened. But the boy wasn't seeing it as an accident. He was seeing it as proof. "I'm worthless," muttered, barely audible, picking up the fallen loaves with hands that shook. "Can't do anything right. Can't keep a tune. Can't stay in one place. Can't even carry a tray without screwing it up." He threw a ruined loaf into the trash. Too hard. The can rocked. Worthless. Stupid. Broken. Each word was a hammer blow he was driving into himself, not anger. Something worse. Certainty. The absolute conviction that he was nothing and would always be nothing. Lorraine stopped what she was doing. She walked over, stood in front of him, made him look at her. "Listen to me." Her voice was quiet, not loud, not dramatic, but firm in a way that demanded attention. "The world beat you down. I get it. Life dealt you garbage cards, your mom dying, foster care failing you, men who should have protected you hurting you instead. None of that was fair. None of that was your fault." He tried to look away. She wouldn't let him. "But that doesn't erase your value, you hear me. That doesn't erase your value." His good eye was glistening. "You matter, Dominic." He blinked, froze. The name hung in the air between them. "My name's Caleb." "No," she said softly, without accusation. "Your name is Dominic. You said it in your sleep 3 nights ago. Called yourself Dominic twice. So I'm calling you Dominic, and I'm telling you that you matter." She held his gaze. "You matter because you're here, because you're trying, because you're 19 years old and you've survived things that would have broken most grown men. Because underneath all that pain, there's a good kid who deserves a shot." Tears welled in his eye, spilled over, rolled down his damaged face. "Nobody's ever said that to me." Lorraine's voice went fierce. The fierceness of a woman who had lost too much to tolerate waste. The fierceness of a mother, of a baker, of a widow who knew the exact price of every wasted day. Then they were wrong. Every single person who made you feel like you didn't matter was wrong. She sat down across from him in the booth, the same booth where she'd fed him that first morning, the same cracked vinyl seats, the same scarred table. "You think I kept you here because I need the help, honey. I've been running this bakery alone for 14 months. I can manage." She folded her hands on the table. "I kept you here because helping you was the first thing that made me feel alive since my husband died. You gave me purpose when I'd lost mine. You gave me a reason to get up in the morning that went beyond just going through the motions of a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore." She met his eyes. "So don't you dare tell me you're worthless. You saved me as much as I saved you." He broke. Not slowly, not gradually. All at once, 21 years of containment collapsing like a dam. He sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so far inside him they didn't sound human. They sounded like an animal that had been caged too long. A child who had held it together through foster homes and group homes and beatings and starvation and sleeping on frozen ground and could not hold it together for one more second. Lorraine didn't hug him. He wasn't ready for that. She knew because Warren hadn't been ready for it either, not for a long time, not until trust had built itself brick by brick over months and years. But she sat with him, handed him napkins from the dispenser, let him cry until there was nothing left, until the sobs became hiccups, and the hiccups became silence, and the silence became something new, something clean, something emptied out and ready to be filled. When he finally looked up, eyes red and swollen, face wrecked, she spoke again. Tomorrow you're going to wake up and choose. Stay broken or start building. I can't make that choice for you. Nobody can. But if you choose to build, I'll help however I can. That conversation lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes in a bakery in Crestwood, Pennsylvania. A widow and a homeless boy sitting in a corner booth at 10 o'clock on a January night. Nothing remarkable about it from the outside. No cameras, no witnesses, no audience. But those 17 minutes gave a 19-year-old kid a foundation he would spend the next 21 years building on. And they gave a 63-year-old widow a reason to believe that kindness still mattered in a world that had taken everything from her. Neither of them knew it yet. Neither of them could see what those 17 minutes would become. The 400 lives, the foundation, the building in Pittsburgh, the 97 motorcycles. They just sat in a booth and told each other the truth. Sometimes that's enough. And what Lorraine didn't know, what she wouldn't learn for another 21 years, was this. That morning, the morning the boy knocked on her door, he had already decided it was his last day. He had walked 12 miles through 11-degree cold with no destination except the woods outside Crestwood. He was going to walk into those woods and not come back. The knock on the bakery door wasn't part of a plan, it was an impulse. The only light on in the entire town at 5:30 in the morning. He thought maybe he could steal some bread. One last meal before the end, but then she opened the door. And instead of a shout, instead of a threat, instead of the world confirming everything he already believed about his own worthlessness, he heard 5 words. Get inside before you freeze. And the door to the woods closed. Not all at once, not permanently, but enough. Enough to get him through that morning. Enough to get him through the eggs and the bacon and the cinnamon roll and the hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Enough to get him through 2 weeks of work and warmth and a woman who treated him like he mattered. Enough to get him to choose. Stay broken or start building. He chose to build. 3 days after that conversation, Dominic vanished. Lorraine arrived at 4 a.m. to find the storage room empty. Clean. Organized with the same precision he'd brought to everything. Space heater unplugged and pushed against the wall. The sleeping bag she'd given him was folded into a perfect square. The pillow placed on top. For one terrible moment, panic seized her. Had they found him, the men from Pittsburgh, the ones who'd beaten him? Had they tracked him down? Was he hurt? Was he dead in a ditch somewhere outside Crestwood, with his face broken open again, and nobody to call 911 this time? Then she saw the envelope on the counter, white, sealed. Her name written on the front in careful block letters. The handwriting of someone who'd learned to write in a system that didn't care if he learned anything at all. Inside was a note and $200 cash. Every cent she'd paid him plus the 20 extra she'd slipped into his last pay. He'd left it all. She unfolded the note with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. You saved my life. I'm going to make you proud. I'll find you again when I've done something worth showing you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for feeding me. Thank you for telling me I matter. I'll never forget. Dominic. Lorraine cried into her coffee that morning, cried while she mixed dough, cried while the first batch of bread baked and the ovens filled the empty bakery with warmth, cried while the cinnamon rolls rose and browned and the glaze melted and the smell of sugar and cinnamon drifted through the building Warren had built with his hands. But Pemberton came in at 6:30 and found her red-eyed and wrecked. You all right, honey? Lorraine nodded, lied, just tired. She wanted to tell someone about Dominic, about the 2 weeks, about the conversation and the tears and the note, about the hope she had fragile as glass that he would be okay, that he would survive, that the words she'd said in that booth at 10 o'clock on a January night had been enough to keep him going. But what if she was wrong? What if he didn't make it? What if telling the story somehow made it less true, so she kept it to herself? Kept the note in a drawer behind the register. Kept his memory in the storage room where he'd slept. Kept his name in her prayers at night, though she wasn't particularly religious. She just sent hope out into the darkness, aimed it roughly north toward Pittsburgh, and trusted that whoever was listening would look after a boy named Dominic who deserved a better hand than the one he'd been dealt. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The morning Dominic left Lorraine stood in the storage room for a long time. She held his note in one hand and $200 in the other, and she just stood there, breathing, listening to the silence. The space heater was cold. The sleeping bag was folded with military corners. The shelf he'd organized was immaculate, every bag of flour labeled, every container of sugar sealed, every box of baking soda turned label out. 2 weeks. He'd been here 2 weeks, and in that time he'd repaired her oven, fixed her plumbing, organized her storage, and given her a reason to believe that Warren's philosophy was more than just a nice thing to say. And now he was gone. She tucked the note into the drawer behind the register, right next to the photograph of Warren, right next to the receipts in the rubber bands and the spare pens. She put the $200 in the same drawer. Couldn't spend it. It was his. It would always be his. Waiting for the day he came back for it. If he came back. Lorraine closed the drawer, tied her apron, started the ovens, and went back to the only thing she knew how to do. She baked. The weeks after Dominic left were strange. Not harder exactly. The grief was still there. Warren's absence was still a physical thing, a weight on her chest that never fully lifted. But something had shifted inside her, a small rearrangement, like a bone that had been set wrong and was finally slowly beginning to heal straight. She noticed things she hadn't noticed before. The man who came in every Thursday morning and ordered black coffee and sat in the back booth and never spoke to anyone. She'd served him for 3 years without ever learning his name. One Thursday, she brought him a cinnamon roll. On the house, he looked at her like she'd handed him a diamond. "My wife left last month," he said, unprompted, like the cinnamon roll had unlocked something. Just packed up and drove away. 22 years. Lorraine sat down across from him, didn't say anything wise, didn't offer advice, just listened the way she'd listened to Dominic. Present, patient, available. His name was Gerald. He came every Thursday for the next 11 years. Same booth, same coffee. The cinnamon roll became their ritual. He never said much, never needed to. He just needed to know that someone noticed he was there. That was the beginning. Not a program, not a mission, not a grand plan, just Lorraine Beckett paying attention. Seeing the people in her bakery who were invisible. The ones who came in quiet and left quieter. The ones who stared at the menu too long because they were counting pennies. The ones whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. She started leaving bags of day-old bread by the back door every evening. Not in the trash. On a clean shelf she set up just inside the service entrance. Bread rolls, sometimes pastries. Whatever hadn't sold that day. A hand-lettered sign taped to the wall. Take what you need, no questions asked. She never watched to see who took it, never checked, never counted, just restocked every evening and found the shelf empty every morning. Colleen graduated from Penn State that spring of 2003, came home to Crestwood, got a teaching job at the elementary school, 3rd grade, 20 minutes outside town. Married a man named Scott Stafford 3 years later, a good man, quiet an accountant who adored Colleen and tolerated Lorraine's habit of sending home leftovers every Sunday. They had 2 kids, a boy named Warren after his grandfather, a girl named Rosalie after Scott's mother. Lorraine spoiled them with cinnamon rolls every weekend and pretended she didn't. Life continued. The bakery continued. Crestwood continued. The world outside changed. Wars started and ended. Presidents came and went. The economy crashed and recovered and crashed again. Gas prices rose. Main Street stores closed one by one. The hardware store, the pharmacy, the 5 and dime that had been there since Lorraine was a girl. But the bakery stayed. Lorraine kept it open through everything. Through the 2008 recession, when half the town was out of work, and she extended credit to families who couldn't pay and never once asked for it back. Through the winter of 2010, when a nor'easter knocked the power out for 4 days, and she baked bread in the fireplace of the Methodist church and gave it away to anyone who was hungry. Through the years when her back started aching and her knees started swelling and the 4 a.m. alarm felt less like a habit and more like a sentence. She kept it open because Warren would have kept it open. Because the bakery was his dream and his hands were in the walls and his fingerprints were in the grain of the counter, and closing the door would be like losing him again. And because people needed it, not just the bread, not just the cinnamon rolls, they needed the place, the warmth, the smell of yeast and sugar and coffee that meant everything was still normal, still continuing, still Okay, they needed Lorraine behind the counter, in her flour-dusted apron steady as bedrock, asking how their families were remembering their orders, knowing their names. She became the fixed point of Crestwood, the thing that didn't change when everything else did. And she did it so quietly, so consistently, so without fanfare or expectation of recognition, that most people didn't even realize what she was. She was the safety net no one knew existed, the bread shelf by the back door, the extra portions she slipped to families who were struggling, the tabs she never collected, the conversations she had after closing with people who needed someone to listen. The quiet, relentless, invisible kindness that defined her life without ever being acknowledged or celebrated or even noticed by anyone, except the people who needed it most. Then came the boy in 2008. He showed up in the spring, April or May, she couldn't remember exactly. A young man, early 20s, blonde hair that hadn't been washed in weeks, hollow eyes with dark circles that looked like bruises, track marks on his arms that he tried to hide under long sleeves that were too warm for the season. He knocked on the back door one morning, nervous, fidgeting, couldn't make eye contact. "You got any old bread? Anything you're gonna throw away? I'm not picky." His name was Ethan, she learned that later. At first he was just the boy at the back door, the one who showed up every morning at 5:45, 15 minutes before she opened and knocked twice, soft, almost apologetic. She'd been throwing away day-old bread for years. Health regulations said she had to, but it was still good, still edible, just not fresh enough to sell. So she started saving it for him. A paper bag, bread, sometimes a couple of rolls, sometimes a pastry that hadn't sold the day before. She'd hand it to him through the back door. He'd take it with both hands, holding it against his chest like something precious. "Thank you, ma'am, thank you." Every morning for 2 months, she never asked where he slept, never asked about the track marks, never asked his last name or his story or how he'd ended up standing behind a bakery in rural Pennsylvania at 5:45 in the morning with shaking hands and a hunger that went deeper than food. She just fed him, the way Warren would have. Some mornings he looked better, steadier, clearer eyes, a hint of color in his cheeks. Some mornings he looked worse, shaking harder, eyes glazed, the track marks darker, fresher. She wanted to say something, wanted to help, wanted to sit him down in the booth and talk to him the way she'd talked to Dominic. But he was different, skittish, the kind of fragile that shatters if you push too hard. So she handed him bread and said nothing and hoped that the consistency, the showing up, the being there was enough. Then one morning in June, he didn't come. She waited. 5:45, 6, 6:15, 6:30. He didn't come. He didn't come the next day either. Or the next, or the next. After a week, Lorraine stopped saving the extra bag. After a month, she stopped checking the back door at 5:45. After a year, she'd mostly stopped thinking about him. Mostly, not entirely. You don't forget the people you feed. They stay with you, their faces, their hands, the way they said thank you like it was the only prayer they knew. She never learned what happened to Ethan Calloway, not until 21 years later when a woman carrying a baby walked into her bakery. But that was still coming. 20 years she did this, baked bread, fed people, kept the doors open, kept Warren's dream alive, and she never once thought of it as remarkable. She just thought of it as Tuesday. In the bakery 21 years later, the lead biker reached up and unzipped his leather vest, pulled it off in one smooth motion and handed it to the man behind him. Underneath, he wore a plain black t-shirt stretched tight across his chest. His arms were fully covered in tattoos. Both sides, intricate designs running from shoulder to wrist, skulls wrapped in roses, flames licking up toward his elbows. Script in a language Lorraine couldn't read from across the counter. But it was his chest that made her breath stop. Right over his heart, visible through the thin fabric of his shirt, was a tattoo. Large, detailed, unmistakable. A cinnamon roll, perfectly rendered. Golden brown swirls, white glaze dripping. And behind it, spreading wide across his chest, angel wings. Enormous. Each feather drawn with such precision, she could see the barbs, the shafts, the way they overlapped and layered and caught imaginary light. The man saw her staring. He smiled. It changed his face completely. The scars softened. The hard lines around his eyes relaxed. For a moment, just a moment, Lorraine could see someone younger beneath the weathered surface. Someone she recognized. "You told me something that January," he said quietly. The bakery had gone completely silent. 96 men stood motionless. Even the coffee maker had stopped its gurgling. The clock on the wall ticked. That was the only sound. "You said you matter, kid. The world beat you down. But that doesn't mean you don't matter." Lorraine's hand flew to her mouth. Those words. She had said those exact words. In this bakery, in that booth, on a January night 21 years ago, when a boy named Dominic had been ready to die and she had sat across from him and told him the truth. Dominic, her voice cracked on the second syllable. The man's smile widened. His eyes glistened. "My real name is Dominic. Dominic Hale. But yeah, I was Caleb when I walked into your bakery 21 years ago. Starving, beaten, planning to die that day." He took a step closer to the counter. "When you fed me, when you let me sleep in your storage room, when you paid me for work I barely did, when you talked to me like I was a human being instead of garbage." Another step. "When you saved my life." Lorraine couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This man, this tall, scarred, tattooed man standing in her bakery with 96 Hells Angels behind him. This was the skinny boy she'd worried about for 20 years. The one who left the note, the one she'd prayed for, the one she'd hoped had survived. "You're alive," she whispered. "You're alive." Dominic nodded. "Because of you." The other bikers were watching. 96 men crammed into a bakery that was meant to hold maybe 30 people. Some of them had tears running down their faces. Hard men, road-worn men, men with prison tattoos and scars and hands that had known violence. And they were crying. Standing in a small-town Pennsylvania bakery, watching a 40-year-old man thank a 64-year-old woman for a cinnamon roll in a conversation. "I've been looking for you for 3 years," Dominic said. "We've been looking, all of us, and we finally found you because we needed to say thank you, and we needed to show you what you built." He gestured to the men filling the bakery. "These are my brothers, Hells Angels, East Coast chapters, 97 of us total." Lorraine looked at them with new eyes. They weren't threatening. They were reverent, standing in her bakery like they were standing in a cathedral. "We rode here from 8 different states, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, Ohio, West Virginia, Massachusetts. Some of these men left at 4 in the morning yesterday, rode through the night, through rain in West Virginia, through fog in the mountains. Because I told them about you, about what you did, about the woman who fed a starving boy and asked no questions. And every single one of them said the same thing." He paused. "They said, 'Brother, we need to meet that woman.'" Lorraine's mind was spinning. 97 men, 8 states, hundreds of miles, for her, for a kid she'd helped 2 decades ago. "I don't understand," she said. "Why?" Dominic's expression turned serious. The smile faded. Something deeper took its place. Something that had taken 21 years to form. "Because what you did for me, I spent my whole life trying to do for others. And it worked. And they need to know where it started. They need to see the woman who planted the seed." He took a breath, steadied himself. "But to understand that you need to know what happened after I left. All of it, the good and the bad, everything I built and everything that nearly destroyed it." Lorraine gripped the counter. Her knees were weak, but she refused to sit. Not yet. Not until she'd heard it. "Tell me," she said. So Dominic told her. After he left the bakery in January 2003, he walked to the bus station in Allentown. 12 miles on foot in 11-degree weather. He had no money. He'd left every cent on her counter. But he had her business card in his pocket, the one she'd written her phone number on, and pressed into his hand the second day, and he had the words she'd spoken tattooed on the inside of his skull where no one could take them. "You matter. Stay broken or start building." He chose to build. Pittsburgh first, a city big enough to disappear in. He found work on a construction crew. Under the table, cash pay, no questions asked. The foreman was a hard man named Sullivan who didn't care about your past as long as you showed up on time and didn't complain. Dominic showed up every day at 6 a.m. and worked until his hands bled and never said a word about pain. Framing, electrical, plumbing, drywall, roofing, everything his foster homes had taught him by neglect. Fix it yourself or it stays broken. The same skills that had kept him alive now kept him employed. He rented a room by the week, a boarding house on the north side of Pittsburgh. No heat, shared bathroom, cockroaches in the walls. But it had a lock on the door and a roof that didn't leak, and after 5 months of sleeping under bridges and in doorways, it felt like a palace. He saved every dollar, ate cheap, rice and beans, canned soup, day-old bread from a bakery 3 blocks from the boarding house. He'd stand outside that bakery some mornings before work watching the baker arrange rolls in the window and think about Lorraine, about the warmth, about the way it felt when you'd forgotten warmth existed and someone handed it back to you. 6 months in Pittsburgh, then a year. He was filling out, getting stronger. The construction work built muscle on his frame. His face healed completely. The broken nose set crooked, giving him a slightly off-center look that would stay with him for life. The bruises disappeared. The fear took longer. He still checked over his shoulder, still slept with his boots on, still flinched when someone moved too fast in his peripheral vision. The wannabe gang from outside Pittsburgh, the ones who'd recruited him, beaten him, threatened to kill him, they were still out there somewhere, and he knew they didn't forget. Men like that never forgot. Then he met Hank Pruitt. It was on a job site in Lawrenceville, a commercial renovation. Dominic was 20, lean and strong and quiet. He ate lunch alone, every day sitting on a stack of pallets behind the building, reading whatever paperback he'd found at the thrift store that week. He was teaching himself, filling in the education the foster system had failed to provide. An older man sat down next to him one Tuesday, didn't ask permission, just lowered himself onto the pallets with the careful movements of someone whose body had been used hard and was beginning to collect on the debt. Gray beard, long, down to his chest, silver earring in his left ear, arms covered in faded tattoos that told a story Dominic couldn't fully read. Military ink mixed with biker ink. An eagle, a skull, dates, names. The kind of tattoos that accumulate over decades, each one a chapter. He wore a black leather vest over a flannel shirt. On the bow of the Hells Angels' death's head, full patch, not a prospect, a member, the real thing. "You're the kid who rewired the third-floor junction box last week," the man said. Not a question. Dominic nodded, said nothing. "Sullivan told me about you. Said you're the best electrician he's ever hired who doesn't have a license. Said you fixed a problem his certified guys couldn't figure out." Dominic still said nothing, just chewed his sandwich and waited. The old man extended a hand. "Hank Pruitt. People call me Ironside." "Dominic." "I know, I asked." They sat in silence for a while, 2 men eating lunch on a stack of pallets in a cold Pittsburgh afternoon. The kind of silence that isn't awkward because neither man needs it to be filled. "You live alone?" Hank asked. "Yeah." "Family?" "No." "How old are you?" 20. Hank looked at him for a long moment, the way a man who's seen too much looks at a young man who's already seen too much. Recognition, not pity, something harder, something more useful. "You remind me of someone," Hank said, and didn't say who. He gave Dominic his card when the job ended. Plain white, black text, Hank Pruitt, a phone number, nothing else. "If you ever need anything," Hank said, "work, a place to stay, someone to talk to, you call that number." 6 months later, Dominic called, not because he needed work, because the wannabe gang found him. 3 of them showed up at his boarding house on a Friday night. He came home from a 12-hour shift and they were waiting in the hallway. The same faces from 18 months ago. Older now, harder. One of them had a knife. They didn't want to hurt him this time. They wanted him to run drugs. A delivery route from Pittsburgh to Erie. Easy money, they said. "You owe us," they said. "We made you." Dominic said no. They beat him in the hallway of the boarding house. Cracked 2 ribs. Split his eyebrow open. Would have done worse, but the landlord came out with a shotgun and they scattered like roaches in sudden light. Dominic lay on the floor of his rented room that night, bleeding through a towel pressed to his face, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and thought about Lorraine's bakery, about the storage room, about the space heater's orange glow and the sleeping bag and the smell of cinnamon in the morning. You matter. Stay broken or start building. He picked up the phone and called Hank Pruitt. Hank was there in 20 minutes. Drove a black pickup truck that rattled like it was held together by willpower. Didn't ask what happened, just looked at Dominic's face, looked at the blood on the hallway floor, and said 3 words. Get your things. Dominic moved into Hank's spare room that night, a small house in Crafton, just outside Pittsburgh. Clean, sparse, military neat. Hank lived alone. Divorced twice. No kids. Former Army, served at Fort Bragg in the late 70s, then 20 years of construction, then the bike, then the club. I've been Hell's Angels since 1979, Hank told him over coffee the next morning. Real angels, not the trash you ran from. Those boys aren't 1%ers, they're cosplayers with a meth habit. Dominic listened, his ribs ached, his eye was swelling shut. You want family? Hank said. Real family, the kind that shows up when someone puts you on the floor. You prospect for us, legitimate. Earn your patch, prove you've got character. Dominic almost said no. The trauma from the wannabe club was still raw, still fresh. The idea of wearing that patch again, even a real one, made his stomach turn. But he thought about Lorraine, about what she'd said, about choosing, stay broken or start building. Yes, he said, he prospected for 2 years, 2003 to 2005. The hardest 2 years of his life, and his life had already been hard enough for several lifetimes. Prospecting for the Hells Angels wasn't a job. It was a trial. Every day tested your loyalty, your endurance, your willingness to put the Brotherhood ahead of yourself. You were the lowest, the newest, the one who got every bad job, every cold ride, every midnight phone call. But it was also the first time in Dominic's life that he belonged somewhere. The first time people expected him to show up and notice when he didn't. The first time he had brothers who would ride 200 miles in a rainstorm because he needed them. He earned his patch at 21 years old. Full member. Pittsburgh chapter. The night they voted him in, Hank Pruitt put the vest on his shoulders and said, "You earned this, son." Nobody had ever called him son. Dominic worked legitimate jobs through his 20s. Mechanic at a Harley dealership, then a custom shop in the Strip District, then freelance builds for clients who wanted something unique. He was good with his hands, always had been. Fix it yourself or it stays broken. But now he wasn't just fixing things. He was creating them. Custom frames, rebuilt engines, paint jobs that turned motorcycles into art. In 2009, at 25 years old, he opened his own shop, Second Chance Cycles. The name came to him at 3 a.m, sitting in Hank's kitchen drinking coffee the way they'd done 1,000 times. Second chance. Because that's what Lorraine had given him, and that's what he wanted to give others. The shop did well, better than well, custom builds for serious riders, magazine features, a reputation that spread through the biker community like wildfire. Dominic Hale builds machines that have souls. That's what they said about him. And it was true. Every bike that left his shop carried something of him in it. The precision of a man who'd learned that details matter. The care of a man who'd learned that broken things can be made beautiful. But the shop was never just about motorcycles. From the very beginning, Dominic hired kids. Kids aging out of foster care. Kids with records. Kids nobody else would touch. He'd go to the group homes, the halfway houses, the shelters. He'd find the ones with that look in their eyes. The look he'd had. Exhausted. Hopeless. Convinced that the world had made its decision about them and there was no appeal. He'd offer them work. Simple at first, sweeping floors, organizing tools, cleaning parts. Then he'd teach them mechanics, welding, fabrication, electrical work. The same skills that foster homes had accidentally given him. The same skills that Lorraine had recognized and valued when she let him fix her oven. And he told every single one of them the same thing. You matter. The world beat you down. But that doesn't mean you don't matter. Lorraine's words, repeated in a motorcycle shop in Pittsburgh by a man who'd been a broken boy in a bakery 2 decades earlier. The same words, the same tone, the same fierce, quiet certainty that had saved his life. Darnell Oaks was one of the first. In the bakery, a young man stepped forward from the crowd of bikers, mid-30s, kind eyes set in a face that had known hard years. He wore his patch with the quiet pride of someone who'd earned it the long way. I'm Darnell, he said to Lorraine. Dominic hired me 8 years ago. I was 25, just out of Graterford after a 3-year bid. Aggravated assault. I was angry and stupid and 22, and I hit a man in a bar fight harder than I should have. He paused. When I got out, nobody would hire me. Nobody would rent to me. I had a felony record, no skills, no family, no address. I was sleeping in my car when Dominic found me. Dominic put a hand on Darnell's shoulder. He gave me a Darnell continued, taught me to weld, taught me to read blueprints, paid me fair, treated me like a person, told me I mattered. The exact words. He looked at Lorraine. Now I run my own fabrication shop in Baltimore. I've got 6 employees. I'm a patched member. I've got brothers. I've got a life. His voice thickened. And it's because of you, ma'am. Because you told Dominic what he told me. That's why I rode 4 hours to stand in your bakery today. One by one others spoke. Quick, earnest, fragments of testimony from men who'd been changed by a chain of kindness they could trace back to a single link. A man named Colt Jensen, road captain, with a scar across his throat. I mentor 6 kids right now through the foundation. Everything I know I learned from Dominic. He learned it from you. One of those kids is in college now, first in his family. A man named Ray from the New Jersey chapter. A woman in Trenton let me sleep in her garage for 3 months when I had nothing. I never forgot. Dominic's story is the same as mine. We all have someone. A man from the West Virginia chapter. A teacher paid for my GED test in 1998. I was 30 years old and couldn't read. Now I run a trucking company. Story after story, voice after voice. 72 of the 97 men in the bakery raised their hands when Dominic asked how many of them had a similar story. 72 men who'd been saved by a stranger's kindness. A meal, a bed, a dollar, a word, someone who saw them when they were invisible and decided they were worth the effort. Lorraine listened to everyone, but Dominic wasn't finished. The hardest part of his story was still coming. In 2014, he said, I started something bigger. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, held it up so Lorraine could see. A website, clean design, professional. The header read New Horizon Foundation, established 2014. Below it, photographs. Teenagers learning to weld in a workshop. Young adults in a classroom, notebooks open, pencils in hand. A row of beds in a clean, well-lit room. A counselor sitting across from a girl who couldn't have been older than 18. A group photo of smiling faces, diverse, young, alive. This is what I built, Dominic said, with Hank's help, with my chapter's help, with chapters across the East Coast. A foundation that helps kids aging out of foster care, housing, job training, mentorship, therapy, legal aid. Everything I didn't have when I was 18. Everything you tried to give me in 2 weeks. Lorraine stared at the screen, at the faces, at the futures. We've helped over 400 kids in 10 years. He paused to let that number settle. 400 kids who aged out of the system with nothing. We gave them something, a place to land, people who gave a damn, a chance. He looked at her, and every single one of them knows about you. Lorraine's head shook involuntarily, disbelief. I tell your story at every intake. The first thing every kid hears when they walk through our door. The story of the woman in Pennsylvania who fed a starving boy, who asked no questions, who saw value in nothing, who awed the words that changed everything. He scrolled through the website. Success stories. A girl named Maya, now a registered nurse in Philadelphia. A boy named Dante, now a certified welder running his own crew. A non-binary kid named River, now a graphic designer with a client list and an apartment and a life they'd built from scratch. Faces, names, futures that almost didn't happen. Your story is the foundation story, Dominic said. The reason we exist, the reason any of this works. But it almost didn't work. Dominic's voice changed, the pride dimmed. Something darker moved behind his eyes. The first year of the foundation nearly killed it. He told her about 2014, the year they opened the first small facility, a rented space in East Liberty, 4 beds, 1 counselor, a shoestring budget held together by donations from Pittsburgh chapter members and a handful of local businesses who were willing to take a chance on a biker running a youth program. The first 3 months went well. 4 kids moved in, started training, started eating regular meals, started sleeping in beds instead of doorways. The local paper ran a small feature, positive coverage, hope in a hard neighborhood. Then one of the kids got arrested, a 17-year-old named Deshaun. He'd been in the program for 6 weeks, making progress, learning electrical work, showing up every day. Then one night he went out, met old friends, and got caught breaking into a car. Petty theft, stupid, impulsive. The kind of mistake that kids make when they're still learning that they have a future worth protecting. But the media didn't see a kid making a mistake. They saw a Hells Angels youth program producing criminals. The headline ran in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, "Biker Gang Youth Program Participant Arrested for Theft." Below it, a photograph of Dominic in his Hells Angels vest, standing outside the facility. The implication was clear. Bikers plus teenagers equals crime. What did you expect? 3 sponsors pulled their funding within a week. The landlord threatened to terminate the lease. A city councilman called for an investigation. Anonymous complaints flooded the building department. Code violations were suddenly discovered in a space that had passed inspection 2 months earlier. Dominic stood in the empty office of the New Horizon Foundation at 2 a.m, surrounded by paperwork he couldn't afford to file and bills he couldn't afford to pay, and felt the ground giving way beneath his feet. Everything he'd built, everything he'd promised those kids, the second chance he'd named his whole life after, crumbling. He sat at his desk and opened the top drawer. Inside, in a plastic bag to protect it from time and handling, was Lorraine's business card, the one she'd pressed into his hand 21 years ago in a bakery in Crestwood. Lorraine Beckett, Lorraine's Bakery. A phone number in blue ink. The card was soft from years of being held. The ink had faded. The corners were rounded. But the words on the back, the ones he'd written himself the night before he left, were still legible. Stay broken or start building. He put the card back, picked up the phone, called Hank. Hank answered on the second ring. 2 a.m, and he answered on the second ring. That's what Brotherhood meant. "It's falling apart," Dominic said. "Then we put it back together," Hank said. "That's what we do." The Pittsburgh chapter held an emergency meeting. 32 members. Every one of them voted to increase their monthly contributions. Phone calls went out to chapters in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia. Money came in, not a lot, but enough. Enough to keep the lights on, enough to keep the beds full, enough to keep the promise. Hank drove to the city councilman's office personally, sat in the waiting room for 3 hours until the man agreed to see him. Then he told him about Dominic, about foster care, about the 400 kids who'd aged out in Pittsburgh that year alone, about where those kids ended up when there was no program. Prison, the streets, the morgue. The investigation was dropped. The foundation survived. And then it grew. More chapters joined. More donations came in. Corporate sponsors who'd been watching from the sidelines, waiting to see if the bikers were serious, started writing checks. By 2016, they had 12 beds. By 2018, 24. By 2020, 40. 400 kids in 10 years. Not all of them made it. Some relapsed. Some went back to the streets. Some ended up in prison despite everything. You couldn't save everyone. Dominic knew that. Lorraine had taught him that too, though she didn't know it. She taught him by example. By keeping her bakery open for 20 years. By feeding people she couldn't follow. By giving kindness without guarantees. You do what you can. You feed who you can. You say the words. And then you let go and trust that some of it sticks. Most of it stuck. "I've been looking for you for 3 years, Dominic said again. Softer now. You moved, sold your old house on Birch Street, changed your phone number, deleted your Facebook. You made it really hard to find you." Lorraine almost smiled. "I didn't delete Facebook on purpose. Colleen's son Warren showed me how to use it, and I accidentally deleted my account trying to change my profile picture." A ripple of laughter moved through the bikers. The tension broke just slightly. "We hired a private investigator," Dominic continued. "Traced you through property records. Found out you still own this building. Still run the bakery, 25 years. He shook his head. 25 years. Same place, same counter, same cinnamon rolls, same woman. His voice caught. "I kept your business card for 16 years, Lorraine. 16 years until it fell apart in my hands. And even after it disintegrated, I kept the pieces in a plastic bag in my desk drawer, because it was the only proof I had that you were real, that what happened here wasn't something I dreamed. He looked at the men behind him. So when my brother Colt asked me last year why I started the foundation, why I cared so much about lost kids, I told him the truth. I told him about you, and he said something I couldn't argue with. Colt Jensen, the road captain with the scar across his throat, spoke up. I said, brother, you need to find that woman. You need to show her what she built, because she has no idea. Dominic nodded. He was right. You have no idea, and that's why we planned this. All 97 of us, 8 states, rode through the night because we needed to do this right. Lorraine gripped the counter, the weight of it, the enormity. She was a baker in a small town who made cinnamon rolls and kept her head down and her door open. She was not the kind of woman who inspired 97 men to ride motorcycles from 8 states. But here they were. And the most important part, Dominic told her, was still to come. The bakery door opened again. Not the front door where 97 Harley-Davidson sat cooling in the morning sun. The back door, the one that led to the alley behind the building. The same door where Lorraine had handed bread to a young man named Ethan Calloway every morning for 2 months 16 years ago. A woman stepped inside, mid-20s, brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a gray sweater that was slightly too large and clean white sneakers. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She'd been crying recently but had stopped. On her hip she carried a baby, maybe 6 months old. Pink onesie with tiny white flowers. A knit cap over fine wisps of blonde hair. The baby was reaching for the cinnamon rolls in the display case, fingers opening and closing, making the universal infant gesture for "I want that." The woman looked around the bakery at the 97 bikers and froze. Dominic waved her forward. "It's okay, Bridget. Come in. This is her. This is Lorraine." The woman Bridget took a tentative step, then another. The bikers parted for her leather-clad men, stepping aside to create a narrow path through the crowd. "Mrs. Beckett." Her voice was soft, uncertain. The voice of someone who'd rehearsed what she was going to say for months and was now terrified she'd forget all of it. Lorraine shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, honey. I don't think we've met." Bridget's eyes filled. She blinked, swallowed, held the baby tighter. "No, ma'am, we haven't, but you knew my brother." The bakery went still. 2008. He was homeless, addicted, trying and failing and trying again. You gave him bread every morning for 2 months through the back door, never asked his name, never asked what was wrong, just handed him a bag and let him keep his dignity. The memory surfaced slowly, like something rising from deep water. Blonde hair, hollow eyes, track marks under long sleeves. 5:45 in the morning. 2 soft knocks on the back door. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you." "Ethan," Lorraine whispered. His name was Ethan. Bridget nodded, tears spilling over now, running down her cheeks unchecked. The baby, oblivious to everything except the cinnamon rolls, reached past her mother's shoulder toward the display case and made a sound of determined yearning. "Ethan Calloway, my older brother, my only brother." A silence moved through the bakery. Not the dramatic silence of revelation, but the deeper silence of grief. The kind that settles into a room when someone is about to say something that cannot be unsaid. "He passed away 4 years ago," Bridget said. "Overdose. He'd been clean for 18 months. Longest stretch of his life. He had an apartment, a job doing maintenance at a school. He called me every Sunday. We talked for hours. He was himself again." She paused, breathed, and then he relapsed. One time, one night, one bad decision, and it killed him. Lorraine's eyes closed, the weight of it. Another one, another face from the back door, another pair of hands accepting bread, another life that didn't get the ending it deserved. "I'm so sorry," Lorraine said. The words were small against the size of the loss. She knew that, had learned it when Warren died. Sorry was a pebble thrown at a mountain. It didn't move anything, but it was all you had. Bridget shook her head. "Don't be sorry, Mrs. Beckett, please. That's not why I'm here." She shifted the baby to her other hip. The baby grabbed a fistful of her mother's sweater and held on. Those 18 months. Those 18 months when he was clean. They happened because of you. Lorraine's head shook involuntarily. He told me about you, Bridget continued, about the woman at the bakery, about the bread every morning, about how you never judged him, never looked at him like he was garbage, never made him explain himself or justify his existence. She was crying freely now, but her voice held steady. The words had been waiting too long to be stopped by tears. He said you were the first person in years who treated him like a human being, like he was worth feeding, and that's what gave him the strength to try rehab. He checked himself in 2 weeks after you started giving him bread. He told the intake counselor that a woman at a bakery made him believe he was worth saving. Lorraine's hand covered her mouth. He got clean, 18 months, and even though he didn't stay clean forever, even though the ending is what it is, he had those 18 months. 18 months where he was my brother again, where I got to know him, where he got to hold my hand when our grandmother died, where he was present and real and alive. She looked at Lorraine with an intensity that burned. That's because of you, those 18 months, every conversation we had, every Sunday phone call, every moment I got to have my brother back. That was your bread, your back door, your kindness. The baby reached for Lorraine now, arms extended, fingers opening and closing. The baby didn't know about grief or addiction or bread through back doors. The baby just knew that the woman behind the counter smelled like cinnamon and warmth and safety. Lorraine reached back without thinking, took the baby in her arms, held her close, smelled that sweet baby smell, milk and powder, and something indefinable that was just new life, pure potential, a future with every page blank. The baby grabbed Lorraine's apron strings and smiled, a gummy, drooly, uncomplicated smile, the kind of smile that has no agenda and no memory and no pain. Just joy. Just now. Her name is Lorraine, Bridget said quietly. The words landed on the bakery like a thunderclap made of silence. I named her after you. After the woman who saw my brother as human, who gave him dignity when he had none, who fed him when the rest of the world had decided he wasn't worth feeding. Lorraine held the baby tighter, tears running down her face and dripping onto the pink onesie. Baby Lorraine didn't mind. She had the apron strings and the warm arms, and that was enough. That was everything. I want her to know who you are, Bridget said. I want her to grow up knowing that kindness matters, that it's worth doing even when you can't see the results, even when the person you help doesn't make it all the way to the happy ending. She took a shaking breath. Ethan didn't get his happy ending, but those 18 months, they gave me mine. Because without those 18 months, I wouldn't have reconnected with my brother. And without reconnecting with my brother, I wouldn't have known about the foundation. She looked at Dominic. 2 years ago, I was pregnant, alone, terrified. My boyfriend left when I told him about the baby. My family had cut me off years ago because of Ethan's addiction. They couldn't handle it, couldn't handle me defending him. So they stopped calling, stopped answering. She straightened her shoulders. I found the New Horizon Foundation on social media. I called, they answered, they helped me find housing, helped me get my GED, connected me with job training, childcare, a support group, a life. She looked at Lorraine holding baby Lorraine. Now I work as a medical assistant. I have my own apartment. My daughter has a crib and a closet full of clothes and a mother who is present. I'm stable. I'm standing. And it's because of the foundation Dominic built, the foundation you inspired. She stepped closer. So you see, Mrs. Beckett, and your bread didn't just feed my brother for 2 months. It fed him enough to try. And his trying fed a connection that fed a foundation that fed me, that fed her. She pointed to the baby in Lorraine's arms. Your bread became a baby. Your kindness became a life. Dominic let the moment breathe. Lorraine held baby Lorraine. Mrs. Pemberton had tears streaming down her face and wasn't even bothering to wipe them. Mr. Hargrove had removed his reading glasses and was pressing the bridge of his nose with his thumb and forefinger, which was the closest he'd come to crying in public in decades. Then Dominic reached into his vest pocket. He pulled out an envelope. Thick, heavy, the weight of it visible in his hand, cream-colored, official-looking. The kind of envelope that contains things that change lives. Lorraine, we didn't just ride here to say thank you. He held the envelope out, steady, his scarred hands not trembling at all. We rode here because thank you isn't enough. Words aren't enough. Not for what you did, not for what it became. Lorraine looked at the envelope. She was still holding the baby. Mrs. Pemberton appeared at her elbow, arms outstretched. Here, honey, let me hold her while you look. Lorraine passed baby Lorraine to Mrs. Pemberton, who immediately began bouncing the child on her hip with the practiced ease of a grandmother. The baby grabbed Mrs. Pemberton's reading glasses and tried to eat them. Lorraine took the envelope with both hands, opened it slowly, carefully. The way you open something when you know that whatever's inside will divide your life into before and after. Inside were documents, legal documents, financial statements, photographs. The first thing she saw was a photograph. A building, 3 stories, red brick, beautiful architecture, tall windows, a wide entrance with double doors. The kind of building that looked like it had been something important once and had been waiting to become something important again. Below the photograph, a document, dense legal language. She scanned it looking for something she could understand and found her own name. Property owner Lorraine Beckett. She looked up, confused, frightened. What is this? Dominic stepped closer. His voice was calm, measured. The voice of a man who had planned this moment for 3 years and was determined to get it right. We bought a building, downtown Pittsburgh, 3 stories, 8,000 square feet. It was a factory once, then a warehouse, then nothing. We restored it, completely. He pulled another photograph from the envelope. An interior shot, clean, bright, professional. Workshop space with welding stations and tool racks. A commercial kitchen with stainless steel counters. A classroom with desks and a whiteboard. A hallway lined with doors, each one numbered. 72 Hells Angels chapters across the East Coast contributed. Corporate sponsors, private donations, 3 years of fundraising, $3.2 million. $3.2 million. Lorraine's knees buckled. She grabbed the counter. Mr. Hargrove jumped up from his booth and slid a chair behind her. She sat down hard. We bought it and we put it in your name, Dominic said, because it belongs to you. Everything in that building started here, in this bakery, at that counter, in that booth. He knelt beside her, eye level now, the same way she'd sat across from him 21 years ago. The Lorraine Beckett New Horizons Center, first floor, vocational training, mechanics, welding, carpentry, electrical, the skills that saved my life. Second floor, transitional housing, 12 beds, clean, safe, warm. A place for kids who have no place. Third floor, counseling center, therapy, legal aid, case management, administrative offices. Lorraine stared at the papers, at her name on the deed, at the photographs of a building she'd never seen in a city she'd barely visited. $3.2 million. 72 chapters, 12 beds, vocational training. This was impossible. This didn't happen to women like her. Women who made cinnamon rolls and talked to photographs of their dead husbands and put bread by the back door for people they'd never see again. I can't, she whispered. Dominic, I can't do this. I'm a baker. I make cinnamon rolls. I don't know anything about running a program. I don't know about transitional housing or job training or counseling. I'm 64 years old. I'm nobody. Dominic didn't flinch, didn't react, just held her gaze with the steady certainty of a man who'd spent 21 years preparing for this exact objection. You already did it, he said. Right here, for 25 years, this bakery is the program. You just never called it that. He gestured to the space around them. You saw people. That's the program. You fed them. That's the program. You told them they mattered. That's the program. Everything else, the building, the budget, the staff, that's logistics, details. We've got people for that. Hank will run security and operations. Colt will coordinate mentorship across 15 chapters. Darnell will teach welding and fabrication. I'll teach mechanics. He pointed to a section of the documents. We've hired a full-time director, licensed counselors, a case manager, a social worker, vocational instructors. The staff is in place. The funding is secured for 3 years. The building is ready. He took her hand. We don't need you to run the logistics, Lorraine. We need you to be the heart. the way you've been the heart of this bakery for 25 years. Walk in every morning, talk to the kids, feed them, see them, tell them what you told me." He squeezed her hand. "You matter. Start building." Lorraine sat in the chair Mr. Hargrove had provided, surrounded by 97 bikers and a baby named after her, and documents worth $3.2 million, and she was terrified. Not of the bikers, not of the building, not of Pittsburgh or logistics or budgets. She was terrified of failing. "What if I let them down?" she asked. Her voice was small, the voice of a woman who'd spent 21 years being strong and was for the first time admitting she was scared. "What if I'm not enough? What if some kid walks in and needs something I can't give, and I fail him the way the system failed you?" Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You think I wasn't terrified when Hank invited me to prospect? You think I slept the night before I opened my shop? You think my hands weren't shaking the first time a kid walked into the foundation and I had to look him in the eye and say the words you said to me?" He shook his head. "I had no idea what I was doing, Moraine. None. I was a mechanic who'd aged out of foster care and gotten lucky and met the right people. I wasn't qualified to run a youth program. I wasn't trained. I wasn't certified. I was just a guy who remembered what you did for him and tried to do the same thing." He held her gaze. "You told me something else that night, in the booth, after I broke down. You said tomorrow you wake up and choose. Stay broken or start building. I can't make that choice for you." Lorraine nodded. She remembered. "I'm saying the same thing to you now. You can stay here. Keep running this bakery. Keep your quiet life. There's no shame in that. None. You've earned it. You've earned." He paused. "Or you can build something, something that will outlive you, something that will save kids who are sitting in storage rooms right now wondering if they matter. Kids who are standing outside bakeries at 5:30 in the morning, freezing, starving, ready to give up." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I can't make that choice for you, but I can tell you that you're capable, that you're exactly who those kids need, that you've been doing this work your whole life without knowing it." The bakery held its breath. Then the front door flew open. The bell above it rang hard, jangling, urgent. A woman pushed through the crowd of bikers who parted quickly, instinctively recognizing the energy of someone who was not here for pleasantries. "Mom." Colleen Beckett Stafford was 45 years old, a teacher at Crestwood Elementary, still living 20 minutes outside town with her husband Scott and their two teenagers, Warren and Rosalie. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw, and the kind of expression that said she had left school in the middle of a lesson and driven faster than was legal or wise. Mrs. Pemberton had texted her. Of course Mrs. Pemberton had texted her. Mrs. Pemberton had probably texted half the county. "What is happening? Are you okay? Why are there motorcycles everywhere? Did someone hurt you?" She stopped when she saw her mother's face. Not hurt, not scared, overwhelmed, tear-streaked, holding legal documents in hands that wouldn't stop shaking, surrounded by men in leather who were looking at her like she was something precious. Colleen's protective instincts flared. She turned to Dominic, who was still kneeling beside her mother's chair. "Who are you? What did you do to my mother?" Dominic stood slowly, raised both hands, open, non-threatening. "Your mom saved my life 21 years ago. We're here to say thank you. That's all. Just thank you." Lorraine reached for her daughter's hand. "Colleen, honey, it's okay. This is Dominic. He's the boy I told you about, the one who stayed in the storage room. Winter of 2003. Colleen's face changed, the anger drained. Recognition flooded in. She'd heard the story, not often. Her mother wasn't a storyteller, but a few times late at night over wine, Lorraine had mentioned the boy, the teenager who'd appeared in January and vanished in February and left a note she kept in a drawer. The one she wondered about. The one she hoped was alive. "The one who left the note," Colleen said. Lorraine nodded. Colleen looked at Dominic, really looked, past the leather and the tattoos and the scar, past the size of him and the roughness of him, and she saw what her mother had seen 21 years ago, a boy who'd been saved. "My mom talked about you," Colleen said. Her voice had softened, the teacher's voice, the one she used with scared kids on the first day of school. For years. Or she wondered if you were okay. More than okay, Dominic said, because of her. Colleen walked to the table, looked at the papers spread across it. The deed, the financial statements, the photographs of the building in Pittsburgh. She read quickly, her teacher's brain processing information with practiced efficiency. Her eyes widened. Mom, is this real? Lorraine nodded, couldn't speak. Colleen picked up the deed, read it twice, set it down, picked up the financial summary, set it down, looked at Dominic. You want her to run this? She's the only one who can. Colleen sat down next to her mother, took her hand, the hand that had packed her lunch every day of elementary school, the hand that had wiped her tears when her father died, the hand that had kneaded 10,000 batches of dough in a bakery her father built. Mom, do you remember that winter after he left? Lorraine nodded. You were drowning. After Dad died, you were barely functioning. Going through the motions. I was at school, but I called every night and I could hear it in your voice. You were disappearing. Colleen's eyes were wet now. And then you helped that kid, Dominic, and something changed. I came home for spring break and you were different. Lighter. More present. You had something back. Something I hadn't seen since Dad. She squeezed her mother's hand. He saved you too, Mom. You never said it out loud, but I saw it. That kid gave you a reason to keep going, and you've been keeping going for 21 years. Keeping this bakery open. Keeping Dad's dream alive. Feeding people through the back door and never telling anyone about it. Lorraine's tears came harder. Colleen was right. She'd been dying slowly in the winter of 2003, and Dominic had given her a reason to live. Not a dramatic reason, not a revelation, just a reminder. That kindness still worked. That Warren's philosophy was true. That feeding people mattered even when you couldn't follow them out the door. Colleen picked up the deed again, studied it, looked at her mother with an expression that was equal parts pride and determination. Dad would want you to do this. Lorraine shook her head. How do you know? Because he taught you to see people, to value them, to feed them first and ask questions later. His whole life was about that. And now 97 men rode here from 8 states to prove that you did it right, that it worked, that it changed lives. She set the deed down in front of her mother. Dad would be so proud, Mom. So proud. Do this. Do it for him. Do it for Dominic. Do it for all those kids who need someone to tell them they matter. Lorraine stood, slowly. Her whole body felt heavy, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like something physical. She looked around the bakery, at the walls Warren had painted, at the counter he'd built, at the display cases he'd sanded and sealed and installed, at his photograph behind the register. Young Warren, smiling Warren, forever 23 in that picture, holding up a level sawdust in his hair, proud of the thing he was building. She looked at the KitchenAid mixer he'd bought her for their 20th anniversary, still working, still mixing dough every morning, 26 years old and still going, which was more than you could say for most things. She looked at the cinnamon roll display. Mildred Beckett's recipe, Warren's mother. The recipe that had traveled from Mildred's kitchen to this bakery to a storage room where a starving boy ate one and cried. The recipe that became a tattoo on a man's chest. The recipe that was told as a story to 400 kids in a facility in Pittsburgh. She looked at Dominic, at the man he'd become. Strong, scarred, alive. A leader who'd taken the broken pieces of a terrible childhood and built something that saved lives. Who'd come back? Who'd kept his promise? Who'd written, I'll find you again, in a note she'd kept for 21 years and meant it. She looked at the 96 men standing behind him. Hell's Angels, outlaws, men the world judged on sight. And here they were, in her bakery, crying, because a woman who made cinnamon rolls had once opened a door. She looked at Bridget holding baby Foring, a young mother who'd been given a chance because kindness didn't stop at one person. It moved. It traveled. It found the next person and the next and the most. She looked at Colleen, her daughter, her heart. Warren's eyes in Colleen's face. She looked at the photograph behind the register one last time. Dominic. Her voice was stronger now, clearer, the voice of a woman who had made a decision. He looked at her, waiting. The way he'd waited 21 years ago in the booth. Patient. Hoping. That night, in the booth. I told you that you mattered. Did you believe me? He thought about it. Honestly, the way she'd taught him to be honest. Not at first, no, I wanted to. I wanted to believe it so badly I could taste it. But I'd spent 19 years being told the opposite, being treated like garbage, being discarded by every system and every person who was supposed to protect me. I didn't believe it right away. He paused. But wanting to believe was enough. It kept me alive. It kept me trying. And eventually I did believe it because you kept showing me it was true. Every morning you let me stay. Every meal you cooked. Every time you treated me like a person instead of a problem. You proved it. Lorraine nodded, understanding, settling over her like warmth from an oven. Then I'll do the same, she said. I don't believe I can do this yet. I don't believe I'm capable of running a center that big of being what those kids need. I'm scared, Dominic. I'm 64 years old and I'm scared. She straightened her shoulders. But I want to believe I can. And maybe wanting to is enough. Maybe wanting to is the first step. The bakery held its breath. I'll run your center. The words were huge, terrifying, exactly right. On 3 conditions. Dominic smiled, that same vulnerable smile, the one that turned a 40-year-old biker back into a 19-year-old boy. Anything. Lorraine pointed to the documents on the table. The vocational program, the mechanics workshop, the welding and carpentry training, that gets named after my husband. The Warren Beckett Trades program. He believed in second chances. He lived a second chance. He grew up in the system same as you. He built this bakery with his hands, and he built a life from nothing, and his name should be on everything that teaches kids to do the same. Dominic's eyes glistened. Done. Lorraine pointed again. The culinary program, the baking kitchen, the training that teaches kids to cook and feed people and understand that a meal is more than calories. That gets named after my daughter. The Colleen Stafford Culinary Program. She's a teacher. She sees potential in kids every day. Her name belongs on anything that teaches someone to nourish another person. Colleen gasped, covered her mouth, tears streaming. Done, Dominic said. Lorraine's third condition was not in any legal document, could not be put on any deed or financial statement. It was simpler than that, and bigger. Every kid who walks through those doors gets a cinnamon roll. She looked at Dominic, held his gaze. Fresh, warm, Mildred Beckett's recipe, the first thing they get, before the intake paperwork, before the counseling session, before anyone asks them their name or their story or what they've done or where they've been. Her voice was fierce now, the fierceness from 21 years ago, the fierceness of a woman who knew the exact value of feeding someone who was starving, because that's where it started, with you. Eating a cinnamon roll in my booth at 5:30 in the morning and believing for the first time in your life that someone cared whether you lived or died. That's the foundation, not the building, not the budget, a cinnamon roll and the belief that you're worth feeding. Dominic crossed the distance between them. He pulled Lorraine into a hug, strong, careful, gentle in a way that his size and his scars and his leather made surprising. 21 years of gratitude compressed into one embrace. The boy she'd saved holding the woman who'd saved him. Lorraine hugged him back. Her arms barely reached around his shoulders. Her flour-dusted apron pressed against his black t-shirt. Her tears soaked into the fabric over the cinnamon roll tattoo on his chest. She felt him shaking. Not from cold, not from fear. From the release of something he'd been carrying for 21 years. The weight of a debt he could never fully repay. The weight of a promise kept. I'll find you again when I've done something worth showing you. He'd found her, and what he'd done was worth more than showing. The bakery erupted. 97 voices, cheering, whistling, applauding. The sound bounced off the walls Warren had painted, and the ceiling Warren had tiled, and the floor Warren had laid, and it filled the space with something it had never held before. Not just warmth, not just the smell of bread and sugar and coffee, but the sound of broken people celebrating the woman who taught them they could be whole. Colleen joined the hug. Then Bridget, baby Lorraine between them, the baby laughing at the noise, reaching for everything, grabbing at leather vests and flour-dusted aprons and Dominic's long hair. Then Hank Pruitt, the old veteran, wrapping his arms around the whole group, his gray beard pressed against Lorraine's shoulder. Then Darnell, then Colt, then others. Men she'd never met holding her like family. Because she'd always been. When they finally released her, Lorraine wiped her face, smoothed her apron, and did the only thing she knew how to do. "Everyone eats." She said it loud, the voice of a woman who'd been feeding people for 25 years and wasn't about to stop now. "That's the rule in my bakery. Everyone eats." She went behind the counter, started pulling cinnamon rolls from the display case, loading them onto trays. The morning's full batch, 24 rolls, not nearly enough for 97 men and a handful of stunned Crestwood residents. She went to the kitchen, started another batch, hands moving with the muscle memory of 10,000 mornings. Flour, sugar, yeast, butter, cinnamon. The bikers helped. Enormous tattooed men in leather vests carrying trays of cinnamon rolls through a small-town bakery like they were serving communion. Someone started the coffee maker. Someone else found cups. The bakery transformed from a place of business into something else entirely. A kitchen table, a family gathering, a celebration. The front door opened. The celebration spilled onto the sidewalk. Crestwood residents who'd been watching nervously from across the street began to approach. Mrs. Pemberton first, naturally. She handed baby Lorraine back to Bridget and marched straight into the crowd, already asking questions, already gathering information she would distribute to every telephone and text chain in the county by nightfall. Mr. Hargrove followed, then others, the librarian, the postman, the woman who ran the antique shop 2 doors down. Children braver than their parents walked right up to the motorcycles. A boy, maybe 7 years old, pointed at a gleaming Harley-Davidson with chrome pipes and custom paint. "Can I sit on it?" The biker, a man the size of a refrigerator with a beard to his chest and tattoos on his neck, grinned. "Sure, kid. Let me lift you up." Soon there were children on motorcycles, parents taking photographs, bikers showing kids how the throttle worked, how the clutch engaged, how the kickstand folded. The fear that had frozen the town 90 minutes ago had evaporated completely, replaced by curiosity, then wonder, then joy. Inside the bakery, Dominic spread blueprints across a table. Lorraine leaned over them, flour from her apron, dusting the paper. She asked questions, sharp questions. Where would the kids sleep? How many staff per shift? What about fire exits? What about dietary restrictions? What about kids who were scared of small spaces? She was already thinking like a program director and didn't even know it. Hank offered to oversee daily operations. Former military, he knew how to create structure without creating a prison, knew how to keep people safe while letting them breathe. Colt offered to coordinate mentorship. He had connections across 15 chapters. Every kid who walked through the door would be paired with a mentor, a biker who'd been where they were, who understood the fear and the anger and the bone-deep certainty that nobody cared, who could look them in the eye and say with authority, with proof, with the scars to back it up, "I've been where you are. It gets better. You matter." Darnell offered to run the welding and fabrication program. He'd teach them the way Dominic taught him, patient, demanding, believing in their capability before they believed in it themselves. Someone produced a leather vest from a saddlebag, custom made, not a Hells Angels patch because Lorraine wasn't a member. Something different, something that bridged 2 worlds. On the back, embroidered in elegant script against the black leather, Lorraine Beckett. Where it started, Lorraine put it on over her flour-dusted apron. The contrast was everything, gentle and fierce, bred in chrome, a baker who'd become a foundation without ever leaving her kitchen. Someone took a photograph. Lorraine standing between Dominic and Hank, cinnamon roll in one hand, coffee in the other, wearing the vest over her apron, flour on her cheek, the biggest smile she'd worn since Warren died. Colleen took one look at the photograph and started crying again. "Dad would love this," she whispered. "He would absolutely love this." The celebration lasted 3 hours. Stories shared, plans made, phone numbers exchanged. Mrs. Pemberton got personal information from at least 30 bikers, which they would later regret when she started sending them Christmas cards and prayer chain updates. Mr. Hargrove shook Dominic's hand and said, "Young man, I've been reading about Hell's Angels in the newspaper for 50 years, and I've never once read a story like this. Maybe the newspapers have been getting it wrong." The young mother who'd pulled her children close when the bikers arrived now sat at a table with Colt Jensenson, listening to him explain the mentorship program, while her 6-year-old son sat on Colt's lap and played with the patches on his vest. By the time the sun started angling lower through the bakery windows, casting long, golden bars across the checkered floor, Lorraine was exhausted, overwhelmed, happier than she'd been in 21 years. Every cell in her body hummed with something she thought she'd lost forever. Purpose, real purpose. Not the purpose of routine, not the purpose of keeping a bakery open because closing it would mean losing Warren again. The purpose of building something new. Something big, something that would outlive her. The bikers began to leave, one by one, then in groups, engines firing up in the parking lot. The rumble that had terrified the town 3 hours ago now felt like a heartbeat, a rhythm, something alive and powerful and heading somewhere that mattered. They rode out in formation, down Main Street, past the traffic light, past the 3 churches, past the closed storefronts and the quiet houses in the fields beyond. Crestwood's residents stood on the sidewalk and waved. The bikers waved back. Some honked their horns. Some revved their engines for the kids who screamed with delight. Dominic was the last to leave. He stood by his bike outside the bakery, helmet in his hand, the late afternoon light catching the scar on his face and the patches on his vest. He hugged Lorraine one more time. "See you in Pittsburgh next week. We've got work to do." She nodded. "I'll bring cinnamon rolls." He laughed, a real laugh, full and warm and free of everything that had weighed it down for 21 years. "I know you will." He put on his helmet, swung onto his bike, kicked the engine to life. The rumble filled the street one last time. He looked at her through the visor. She couldn't see his eyes, but she could feel them. The boy she'd saved, looking at the woman who'd saved him. Then he rode away, down Main Street, into the Pennsylvania evening, heading west toward Pittsburgh, toward a building with her name on it, toward 400 kids who already knew her story, and the thousands more who would. Lorraine stood in front of her bakery and watched until the sound faded into nothing. Then she turned around and walked back inside. The bakery was a mess, crumbs on every table, coffee cups everywhere, cinnamon roll glaze on surfaces that had never seen it, flour footprints on the tile, a leather glove someone had forgotten on the counter, a handwritten note from Darnell on a napkin. "Thank you for starting everything." Baltimore chapter. She began cleaning. The way she'd cleaned every night for 25 years. Wiping down tables, collecting cups, sweeping floors. Her hands knew the work. Her body knew the rhythm. But everything else was different. She stopped in front of Warren's photograph. Young Warren, smiling Warren, the man who'd taught her that people weren't disposable. "You should have seen it, Warren," she said to the photograph. 97 of them, in your bakery, crying over cinnamon rolls." She smiled. "They named a building after me. Can you imagine a building in Pittsburgh with your name on the trades program, Colleen's name on the kitchen?" She touched the glass of the frame. "I'm going to do it. I'm scared to death, but I'm going to do it. Because you taught me to see people, and apparently I've been doing it all along without knowing it." She paused. "I wish you were here. I wish you could see what that boy became. You would have liked him, Warren. He's got your hands. Not literally, but the way he fixes things, the way he builds, the way he looks at broken kids and sees what they could become." She wiped her eyes. "I'll make you proud. Both of us will." She turned off the lights, locked the door, walked to her car in the October evening. Tomorrow she would call Dominic. Start planning, start learning, start building. But tonight she would drive home and sit in the kitchen and eat a cinnamon roll and talk to Warren's photograph on the mantle and tell him everything. Every detail, every moment, the way she'd been telling him things for 22 years. And tomorrow she would wake up and choose, not stay broken or start building. She'd already made that choice 21 years ago when she opened the door for a boy with a black eye and an empty stomach. This was the next choice, the bigger one, the one that would take everything she had and everything she was and turn it into something that would outlive her. She was ready. 6 months later, the Lorraine Beckett New Horizons Center opened its doors in downtown Pittsburgh. The building was beautiful. 3 stories of restored brick and tall windows and possibility. 200 people attended the grand opening. Local politicians, business owners, foster care advocates, social workers, reporters, and in the center of it all, Lorraine Beckett, 65 years old, wearing her honorary leather vest over a clean white apron, standing between Dominic Hale and Hank Pruitt, surrounded by the first cohort of 8 kids who'd moved into transitional housing the week before. 8 kids, ages 18 to 21, 4 boys, 4 girls, every one of them carrying a garbage bag of clothes and a look in their eyes that Lorraine recognized. The look of people who'd been told they didn't matter so many times they had started to believe it. She handed each of them a cinnamon roll, warm, fresh, Mildred Beckett's recipe. "Welcome home," she said. The Warren Beckett Trades program launched with 12 students. Hank ran it with the precision of a military operation and the warmth of a man who'd spent 40 years learning that discipline and compassion were not opposites. The kids learned mechanics, welding, carpentry, electrical. They learned to fix things with their hands, and in fixing things, they fixed something inside themselves. The Colleen Stafford Culinary Program launched with 10 students. They learned to bake bread, to make cinnamon rolls, to cook meals that fed body and soul. Colleen drove from Crestwood twice a month to guest teach, and every time she walked through the kitchen door, Lorraine saw Warren in her daughter's face. The patience, the steadiness, the belief that everyone could learn if someone cared enough to teach them. And every morning before classes started, before counseling sessions began, before the day's logistics consumed the building's attention, Lorraine showed up, 65 years old, 4 a.m. alarm, the same alarm she'd been answering for 26 years. She drove from the apartment she'd rented in Pittsburgh 3 blocks from the center because she wanted to be close. She unlocked the kitchen, turned on the ovens, mixed the dough, rolled it thin, spread it thick, coiled it tight. Mildred Beckett's cinnamon rolls, baked fresh every single morning. By the time the kids woke up, by the time they shuffled into the common area with sleep in their eyes and uncertainty in their hearts, by the time they sat down at the long table and looked around at a place they weren't yet sure they belonged in, there was Lorraine, standing behind the counter, apron dusted with flour, a tray of warm cinnamon rolls in her hands. "Good morning, you matter, eat." 1 year later, 34 kids had gone through the program, 28 had secured stable housing and employment, 4 had enrolled in college, 2 had started small businesses. Dominic stood beside Lorraine at the annual fundraiser. Hells Angels chapters from 15 states attended. They raised $340,000 in one night, enough to fund operations for another year, enough to start planning the second location. 2 years later, that second location opened in Philadelphia. A third was planned for Baltimore. Lorraine was 66 now. She had transitioned to part-time training staff to handle the daily operations she couldn't sustain forever. Her back ached, her knees protested. The 4 a.m. alarm was getting harder to answer, but she still showed up, still baked, still sat with kids who didn't believe they mattered and told them with the quiet certainty of a woman who had 23 years of proof that they were wrong. Some traditions don't change. Some words don't wear out. Some recipes keep saving lives one batch at a time. In the common room of the Pittsburgh Center, a photograph hung on the wall, framed, protected by glass. The photograph showed a small bakery in a small town. Red and white checkered curtains, a chalkboard menu, a counter built by hand, and behind the counter a woman in a flour-dusted apron standing next to a young man in a leather vest, both of them smiling. Both of them whole. Below the photograph, a small brass plaque, where it started, Lorraine's Bakery. Crestwood, Pennsylvania, January 2003, and taped beside it in a sealed plastic frame, a note written in careful block letters on bakery stationery. "You saved my life. I'm going to make you proud. I'll find you again when I've done something worth showing you." Every kid who walked through the center's doors saw that note on their first day. Every kid heard the story about the woman who fed a starving boy, who asked no questions, who told him he mattered, who gave him a cinnamon roll and a place to sleep, in 17 minutes of truth that became a foundation, a building, a movement, a family. And every kid on their first morning sat at the long table and received a warm cinnamon roll. And across from them, whether it was Lorraine herself or Dominic or Hank or Darnell Or one of the dozens of mentors who'd passed through the program, someone looked them in the eye and said the words, "You matter. The world beat you down. But that doesn't mean you don't matter." Tomorrow, you wake up and choose. Stay broken or start building. I can't make that choice for you. But if you choose to build, we'll help. Some of them cried. Some of them didn't believe it. Some of them wanted to believe it so badly they could taste it the way Dominic had tasted it 21 years ago in a booth in Crestwood with glaze on his fingers and tears on his face. And that was enough. Wanting to believe. That was always enough, because in 2003, Lorraine Beckett fed one homeless boy. That boy grew up and fed 400 more. Those 400 would feed thousands, because kindness doesn't end. It doesn't expire. It doesn't run out. It multiplies. It ripples through time, touching lives you'll never meet, solving problems you'll never see, building futures you'll never imagine. All because one woman chose to open a door. All because 97 bikers chose to say thank you. All because a cinnamon roll became a symbol of something bigger than any of them. Hope, second chances. The stubborn, irrational, magnificent belief that broken doesn't mean finished. That where you start doesn't determine where you end. That feeding someone who is starving is never, ever wasted. Lorraine Beckett didn't set out to change the world. She set out to get through the day, to honor her husband's memory, to not drown in grief. But here's what she learned, what Warren always knew, what Dominic carried with him for 21 years, what 400 kids discovered in a building in Pittsburgh named after a baker from a small town. Purpose finds you. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with paperwork or a $3.2 million building or 97 motorcycles. It comes disguised as a knock on the door at 5:30 in the morning. A pair of bruised hands pressed against cold glass. A voice saying, "I'm hungry." And all you have to do is open the door. Feed first. Ask questions later. You never know whose life you're saving.